All right, let's talk some draft with draft expert Joe Deleone. All right, welcome back to the Onebar and Lupagus show. I'm Onebar with Lupagus with special guest Joe Deleone, Hack City. Those guys are pumping out draft videos left and right. And Joe, I know you got your hands in a lot of other stuff too, but thanks for coming on the show. I'm excited to talk some draft.
Yeah, I think this is my first. I was just saying to you guys, this is like my first real draft appearance of the cycle. Hopping on with you guys, you grabbed me early, which I think you guys usually typically are one of the first ones. But no, I'm excited to transition. I'm excited now that the college season is done, which was a really busy time for me. That I can actually evaluate some of these players and talk about them. And the Vikings in an interesting spot, a lot of different directions that they can go. So looking forward to diving into it with you guys.
Absolutely. In the title, we're putting. I called you a draft expert. In the title, it's gonna be draft expert. Do you consider are you to that level? Are you officially an expert?
I mean, I'd like to pretend that I am.
Hell yeah. Hell yes. Hell yes. You are our go-to guy, man. Whether you like it or not, we're gonna hit you up for all draft stuff in the off season. So we appreciate you coming on.
Of course.
But we got some. We're gonna stick to some pretty high-level topics. And if you're watching this in mid-April, just remember we're doing this in January, so things are liquidy, wet. But position-wise, is there just a position in this draft where you're like, that's gross? Like this position, disgusting.
Yeah, the interior offensive line class gets pretty shoddy pretty quick. That's the one for me. There's a couple of, it's a weird class because there's a lot of talent at the top, but what you're going to hear a lot of people talk about throughout this process is that because so many guys went back this year, which is unheard of with all this NIL money, there's a lot of guys that probably would have gone on day 3 that found out that they can make a little bit of extra cash to transfer to a bigger program. So they're going back. And we're now in this situation where, I mean, I've heard of some directors of scouting complaining about the possibility that they have to move up all of these guys that would go undrafted into that draftable bucket. So it's going to be a really weird class. And the offensive line, the interior offensive line fits that for me because you've got guys like Christian Haynes from UConn. You've got Troy Fautanu from Washington. There's some pretty good centers at the top. Jackson Powers Johnson, Zach Frazier from West Virginia. But, man, it is just a really, really weird, shoddy group of just who's who after that, and you're kind of guessing at that point. The edge class is kind of the same way, too. We don't have the usual premier elite player at the top that's going to go in the top 10. Instead, there's a lot of really good football players like Jared Verse from Florida State, Dallas Turner from Alabama, Lietu Latu from UCLA. And then we just start to really lose ourselves as we get past day 2 with just a bunch of who's again for that class.
You mentioned the top of that interior line. What is the top? What round are you thinking is that first guy to come out the board?
I really think that there is a strong possibility that Fautanu goes somewhere in the top 20. Very flexible, fluid athlete that was playing left tackle for Washington this past year, is going to bump inside and is going to be a really good football player. Just rare physical movement tools that you don't see from a guard prospect. And then I think that there's a strong possibility because of how quickly the amount of good centers in this class starts to deplete, that one of these centers could go somewhere in the first round, whether that is Jackson Powers Johnson from Oregon at the very back end to a team like the Miami Dolphins that need a center, or another guy that's been projected as a center that played tackle is Graham Barton from Duke. I see him more as a day 2 player, but he has been brought up too as a first rounder.
All right, so those are the gross positions. Which ones would you consider to be kind of stacked deep this year?
Yeah, I think that wide receiver and cornerback right now clearly seem to be the best that I've noticed. I mean, I'm like 10 guys in terms of giving my grades and evaluations or more on both of those position groups. And I am amazed by how many top 50, top 25 grades or higher that I've given to both of these classes. I think that there is a tremendous amount of talent at receiver at corner this year. And it starts with guys at receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr., and then we keep moving down. Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU, Malik Neighbors, his teammate at LSU, Roma Dunze from Washington, Adonai Mitchell from Texas. And then at corner, there is a possibility we could see 6 or 7 guys that go in the first round. Cooper Jean from Iowa, Nate Wiggins from Clemson, Kalen King from Penn State. I could even continue to go on and on. Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, both from Alabama. There is just so many guys that are good enough to go not only in the first round, but I think in the later rounds of the draft, there's going to be some players that were surprised, ended up falling as far as they did, that end up being really good players in the NFL.
All right. As you can see, this is why we got Joe on. He knows his stuff. So we got to talk quarterback. Viking, the big offseason talk. Are they going to re-sign Kirk Cousins? What are they going to do at quarterback? Big question mark. But just looking at the Vikings offense, all the weapons they got, Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson, pretty decent offensive line. What quarterback do you think is ready to go to step right in if they were actually to look at a potential first-round quarterback? Which one fits the Vikings the best?
Yeah, I think that there's 2 that really fit that bucket that could fit at that 11 spot for the Vikings if they want somebody who is more ready to go. I look at the 2 guys that have played the most football, that are the most experienced, that have taken that next step and are a little less toolsy and a little bit more proven, and that being Jaden Daniels from LSU and Bo Nix from Oregon. I like Jaden Daniels considerably more than I like Bo Nix, just because Daniels is an elite, rare athlete. I've heard he's going to run in the 4.4s at the combine. He's supposed to likely run, according to somebody that I spoke to. Jaden Daniels is so gifted, and for him to take this next step this past year, where we knew he was a good runner, to show that he can deliver the ball deep down the field, down the middle of the field, with really good pace. He really flashed his potential as a deep ball thrower, and doing it with consistent accuracy. That stuff translates, and I think that the reason why that's an immediate step in type of a player, because he is so cerebral, he made such quick, easy decisions, that will translate to being impactful for the Vikings if he ends up being their pick. The purple to purple could work very nicely there. Bo Nix is very different, and I think that Bo Nix is a cheaper option. I don't really have a good sense on where I think he's going to go necessarily, just because I think some teams are going to really love him because he's so much of an older player, and he's been around, and he's so accurate, and he's so consistent, and he gets the job done. But I feel like a lot of teams are going to look at him and see Kenny Pickett. And a lot of teams that saw Kenny Pickett for what he was and what we're now seeing the reality of him in the NFL, he's really high floor, but his ceiling is super limited. So when you don't have the weapons around him and you don't have the right offensive scheme that allows him to deliver the ball to playmakers and just allow those playmakers to go off, which works for the Vikings, you've got a lot of really elite receivers. I just don't know if he's going to end up going in that top 15 range. But for this discussion, his skill set fits that for the Vikings. I think there's a lot of comparisons between him and Kirk Cousins, just like physically. Bo Nix is a better athlete. Bo Nix also has a little bit of a better arm than Kirk Cousins. So that could be a nice one-to-one transition from Bo Nix to Kirk Cousins, getting a younger, more athletic version of him.
Nice. So the Vikings defense has got a lot of holes. So let's say they use their first 2 picks, address the defense, look at quarterback. They don't have a 3rd round pick. They pick in the 4th round. I think they have 2 picks actually in the 4th. Is there anybody in those mid rounds, any quarterback prospect that you like that you think has potential to potentially be the guy?
Yeah, there's a couple that I think could fit this conversation. The 2 that really stand out for me are either Spencer Rattler from South Carolina or Michael Pratt from Tulane. I really like Michael Pratt. I think that he's another player who very high floor. He kind of reminds me of maybe circumstantially with what the Raiders got with Aiden O'Connell, where we started to see that this guy, if you need him to step in and play, he's going to get the job done. He's a really smart football player. He's very experienced. He knows what he needs to do. But then we started to see the more that he played that there were some limitations to his game. I actually like that idea maybe for the Vikings, where Kirk Cousins really isn't that old. Yes, his injury situation isn't great, but I think that one thing was proven. You need a guy that isn't volatile so that in the event of Kirk Cousins suffering another significant injury, you're not forced to go make a big trade for Josh Dobbs and then it not panning out the way that you were hoping it to. A guy like Michael Pratt sits on your bench, and if you need him to step in, he can do so. And he can be a really, really nice, good, high-quality backup that eventually maybe he does well enough in filling in for Kirk Cousins that he takes over that job because he has that upside. And Spencer Rattler, former top quarterback recruit, has a fantastic arm. He's much more volatile. He is more of a project. He fits more of that Kellen Mond type of a description where he's just a really strong athlete, really big arm, but don't totally know if it's all going to come together for him because of the decision-making that we've seen on film. So I think the two of those guys, as we start to look on day 2, Rattler maybe a little bit later on day 3 would make a lot of sense.
So last quarterback one for you. We got the top 3 quarterbacks that everybody's talking about. Then you got like McCarthy, Penix, Bo Nix, like we've already mentioned. Where do you rank these guys? I mean, like how do you rank them? If you're a GM, which one tickles your fancy?
Yeah, but Bo Nix is the and it's a really interesting question to bring up, and I think it's going to be really highly debated throughout this whole process because there's the clear top 3 that anybody with eyeballs knows that the top 3 are as good as they are and worthy of going in the top 10. And then there's this group of guys that are just like, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know if this guy's going to really work out. And I think that certain teams are going to have to sell themselves and certain teams are going to be really excited about them. For me, I like Bo Nix as that top secondary group. Michael Penix has such a big arm and he's got great pocket awareness, but the injury stuff is going to scare the hell out of teams. I mean, we just saw Hendon Hooker fall as far as he did last year, and there's some similarities in their play style that we can see that are comparable. I think that Michael Penix is probably going to hurt when he get hurt when he does his medical check at the combine. JJ McCarthy, I am so unbelievably out on, and JJ McCarthy is a guy who is going to get overdrafted because he checks every stupid box that the NFL gets themselves caught up in, and they fall for this dumb game every single cycle. He's tall, he's big, he can move, he's got a strong arm, and he's a winner. But we fail to recognize that the guy didn't really step up when they needed him to, and he wasn't the key reason for them winning. He did just enough to keep their offense moving forward, and if not, made detrimental mistakes that could have held them out of games. I mean, we saw if it wasn't for a heel going down in the first play of the Rose Bowl, he would have thrown one of the worst interceptions that I've seen all season just trying to throw the football away. He reminds me of Daniel Jones in the sense that we see all these tools. And I think if there was less talent in this quarterback class this year, he'd go even higher because of desperation. And that happened with Daniel Jones, where teams saw him and they're like, I mean, he's got all of it. He went to a good academic school. He's a big, smart kid. Can we get him to figure it out? And we're starting to see that, yeah, he can do some nice stuff. He can make the plays, the difficult throws, but more often than not, he turns the ball over and he makes really bad decisions just because for some reason that internal decision-making just doesn't really work there.
All right. Thank you, Joe, for all that on the quarterbacks. Let's move off the quarterbacks. Vikings also have to bolster their defensive line. Not a lot of talent there on the roster right now. Deleone Newton seems to be a clear-cut number 1. Then there's this group of guys, do these mock draft simulators. You see them all kind of lumped in late first, early second. Talk about that second group of defensive tackles. Who you like out of that group?
Yeah, I love this second grouping of defensive tackles because Deleone Newton's in a completely different category, but we've got a lot of unique, strong players based on the skill set that you're trying to attack that are going to be really good players on day 2. And I think that there's going to be a run on defensive tackles that ends up happening. The one that I like the most is Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State, a little bit more compact, very twitchy player, a lot of upside as a pass rusher, not a guy that is really going to rack up huge stats, but is the ideal 3 technique in the NFL because he's disruptive. He plays low to the ground. He's hard to move. I like a guy like Chris Jenkins from Michigan, who's just really powerful and is really hard to move off the line of scrimmage. One player who I think could go maybe even in the late first round is McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, who so quick off the ball. Another guy who fits that description of just low to the ground, really powerful, super, super stout. And then a guy that I just recently watched the other day, Byron Murphy, is another player who could get selected on day 2 and end up being an impactful player where he's just an immovable object. And you see that close down speed that he has to finish on ball carriers, to finish on quarterbacks. That stuff is really fantastic. Not your first round 6'5" defensive tackle that has the crazy measurables, but there's a lot of guys like Byron Murphy that I think are going to be really good football players. And then the Vikings would have 2 guys named Byron Murphy on their roster.
Amazing.
Very confusing. Very confusing. I wouldn't complain. Quick follow-up on that. I was watching your show when you guys were talking about Newton, and it seems like you feel he's a straight up, he should be on a 4-3. I mean, Vikings run a lot of 3-4. Would the Vikings even be sniffing around him at 11?
Yeah, I just don't think that he's going to fit in that 3-4 scheme because he's so compact. He is your ideal 3-tech. Smaller, very quick feet, closes down well, he's got really good hands, upside as a pass rusher. That's the stuff that you want in a 3 technique when your 1 tech is going to be eating up those blocks and taking up space. When we're running a 3-4, he's not tall enough and long enough to play one of those end positions. He's not really meaty enough to play that nose position. I think he's strong enough to hold the point of attack, and he takes on double teams really well. That's the thing that's the most surprising for a guy of his size. We don't really see that often. A lot of people are going to get mad when this comp happens, but his easiest comp is to that of what Aaron Donald does. I don't think he gets to that level of production, but the way that we've seen Aaron Donald used in the NFL, I think a lot of teams are going to try and get that out of Newton.
All right, Danielle Hunter, another one like Kirk Cousins, could be gonzo. You already touched on the edge rushers a little bit, and I think I already know your answer, but is there a guy like is there a superstar, or is there just like this guy's going to be really good? I mean, we're looking to replace a potential Danielle Hunter. We need a baller.
Yeah, I don't know if there's necessarily a true superstar, but I think there's a lot of guys that have really good traits. If they end up in the right situation, they can be super productive. And Jared Verse is the guy that I have leading this group who's really strong. Dallas Turner's really bendy, but still kind of putting it together. Braylon Trice, powerful edge rusher who I feel, he feels like a Minnesota Viking because he's so physical. He's so aggressive. He's got really good hands. Lietu Latu is another guy I also would pay close attention to. I think if it wasn't for the fact that he's not a premier athlete, he would be considered a lot higher for me and by a lot of teams. He's so technically sound. He is a technician. If there's one guy that's not my top player that I could see end up becoming the best out of the group that ends up being really productive, it probably is Lietu Latu, because you can see that there is a commitment to working on his technique and improving. And the technique that he brings to the table is that of a guy that's been playing in the NFL for a couple of years.
Nice. Hey, Joe, I want to ask you this, and someone who spends as much time as the draft as you do. Right now it's January. We got Senior Bowl coming up, East-West Shrine Game, Combine, Pro Days. Do you find your rankings are really, guys going up and down? Is that true, or is that your rankings tend to stay, pretty true to how you initially have them? I mean, are guys moving up and down as much as everybody thinks they are between now and April?
It's a little bit of a red flag to me if I see other pundits moving guys up and down rapidly because of testing numbers. The biggest thing for the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Game, those opportunities are to bring light to guys that maybe we haven't watched yet, guys that we haven't considered. There are all of these guys that were really productive in college football this past year, or guys that you might have scouted as underclassmen that are going to be good, that you come back and you give those final grades to. But there's guys that slip through the cracks. A guy like Ade Odabuare last year is a really good example from Northwestern, who made the transition from edge to defensive tackle, kills it at the Senior Bowl, dominates the one-on-one reps, and then you start to think to yourself, wow, I didn't even know who this kid was because he doesn't have the stats. You watch the film, you see that there's traits to work with, and then a guy like that, you go to the NFL Combine, that's just more reassurance of when guys test really well that you can find out, okay, I didn't really consider this guy worthy of even giving a strong, deep evaluation to, but because he tested so well, I'm going to go back, I'm going to grade him and see what I need to do there. But you're not necessarily going to, just because a guy runs a fast 40 or has a big vertical and has good testing numbers, you're not going to move a guy from a top 150 grade, a day 3 grade to a first round pick. That stuff should not happen. Could you maybe bump up a guy who is a day 2 prospect to late first round? Absolutely. And I think that stuff does happen, but there typically is not going to be a huge range of changes throughout this process.
All right, last one. Once again, joined by Joe Deleone. Hit him up, Hack City. Like I said, they're pumping out draft videos, and they are fantastic. Last one. So the draft class from last year, whether you were wrong or you're just surprised as far as like, I can't believe this guy didn't have more of an impact as a rookie. Granted, there's plenty of time for them to get better, but who was that guy last year you're just surprised did not make the impact?
I think a lot of other draft folks can agree with me on this one, and he's a Minnesota Viking, and I think that you guys know who exactly I'm going with. Ivan Pace is it? But here's the thing: I was not as low as some people were on Ivan Pace. I was actually pretty high on him originally, and then I came to reality because he is a small, undersized linebacker who strictly played like a pass rushing role at Cincinnati, which is just such a weird combo. I saw the tools. Like I saw a guy that was really powerful for his size, and I kind of wondered what could happen with him. I was shocked that he went undrafted, and then to see him go this far to be a defensive rookie of the year candidate, that to me was really surprising. And I think that most people were surprised. I think that the only people that are really excited about this and were saying, yeah, we knew he was going to be good, were Vikings fans. But it's exciting to see him play well. I always like these smaller players that find ways to succeed, and he's been a fun story to follow.
Boom. That was there a dud? I mean, that was a pleasant surprise. Was there a guy that you just thought didn't live up to expectations?
Oh man, the guy that didn't live up to expectations. I mean, Kalijah Cansey is probably one that comes to the mind, because he had a really good playoff game, but this whole year he got his ass kicked, trying to defend the run, and he's just had so much trouble trying to do that, which I kind of knew coming in, but he probably should not have gone in the first round. He was somebody that I'm a little bit regretting having been so high on, because he kind of like Ivan Pace, where he's so unique. He's not physically the typical measurables and the typical power profile for a defensive tackle, but he's such a good pass rusher that there has to be a way for him to succeed. Him only being a designated pass rusher as a first-round defensive tackle, that's a problem. That's not a first-round pick, and he shouldn't have been a first-round pick. So for me, having graded him and putting him in my top 15 prospects, he's probably the one that comes most to mind.
He's going to light it up with 15 sacks next year and make you look like a genius.
I hope so.
Feel it. All right, Joe Deleone, once again, man, we appreciate it. Love talking draft. I am getting my draft juices are pumping. I could talk to you all damn day, but you do not want that. So appreciate it again, man. Like I said, Hack City, hit them up. They do great content.
Hell yeah. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, guys.